I don't think that in any of my previous videos I have spoken enough about custom event properties. Let's fix that. So there are two things in QReader. One is called a protocol, and that is the mechanism for bringing data in. The most common one is syslog. When you send something to QReader on port 514, then that's going to be the protocol being used. But then after that has been brought in, there is the DSM or parser. I mean, when I say DSM is device support module in QReader lingo, is understood as a parser. And what that will do is that it will interpret that data. It will see, okay, I know what this particular event is. And based on that is what you can do in QReader. Like you may fire an offense because you have on the rule that says when this event happened, boom. You can do searches for particular events, the report, etc. Let's talk a little bit about how that works. There are basically two sets of properties. What is called the normalized properties, which are standard. I mean, they should be the same. They should be available, or most of these things should be available with the same name in every log source. What are some of those normalized properties? Username. I don't care what it is, but most logs, when they have a user ID, a username, that is the property that should be grasped. Of course, there is source, IP, and there's one for IPv6. There's a source port, and of course the correspondent destination IP and IPv6 destination port. What else? Log source time is of course very important. When was the log received? There can be source MAC address. There can be destination MAC address. There are some other fields that exist sometimes, what it called pre and post NAT, and network address translation. When you get things going through a device that changes the IP and it still puts the IP address where it came from, and a few others. Let's actually see some of those in a particular example. Here we have an offense that fired because there are some rules that found stuff on the logs that made it a match, found unique elements that indicate something that is abnormal. Let's actually use as one of those logs that contributed to those that were analyzed by those rules that contributed to the offense. Let's take a look at one of those and see a few things here. Well, first of all, this is how the log comes. I'm going to scroll down here. This is the payload as it came, and these are the things that were extracted in this particular case. What are the things that were extracted? Let's talk about these things later, but things that were start time was there. These are what I'm going to talk later about custom event properties that were not present. This one was, right? We can even see some additional ones like the source IP, destination IP, and source asset name, the post NAT, pre NAT. I mean, some of this data was not actually there. So now, what are the custom properties? Let's go back to the whiteboard. These are additional fields that whoever created the parser, or you can even extract additional things from the logs that the guy who created the parser did not have in mind. And if we go back to our example, let's go back here. These are the things, for example, task name, all these that has the word custom in parentheses. These are things that are not part of the normalized. These are the ones that are specific for this particular log source. Now, there's an important button when you look at an event, at the details of an event here, called map event. And what this allows you to do is to see, actually get back to the whiteboard again. Well, when you get either normalized or custom properties, there are two things that are extracted that are very important, called the event ID and the event category. Okay? With these two things, and again, they can come, I don't want to give the impression that they only exist with normalized properties. They exist in both. And this is a way for Curator to identify a particular log as a kind, a firewall denied, a this or that. I mean, and that's what enables those rules to work. But there is additional data that does not come inside that payload. And that is, we take the combination of these two things and we identified and populate, we'll see later in the DSM editor, a QID record. And in that record, there is, of course, a QID number, and you can even have a rule that fires on a QID. You can say when QID equals, and that identifies a unique element. But there's also something very useful, the event name. For example, as I said before, firewall denied, or of this one, MS SQL login successful, or something that was in there. There is usually an event description that helps understand better the nature of this particular event. For classification, there is a low-level category and a high-level category. And all these things you define, I'll show you this in the DSM editor, how you select those. Should you want to create one or change an existing one. And there's another parameter called the severity that indicates how severe this particular event is. All these things in red, again, they don't come from the payload, but the guy that created the parsers, when an event is mapped. And in Curator lingo, parse means, well, I understand the nature of this, I was able to extract a few things in there, but unless I extract an event ID and event category, I cannot map this to a unique QID record. And that's what sometimes you may see in the DSM editor, parse but not map, meaning that this combination, this couple of event ID and event category, was not identified. And that is how these two things are mapped in here, and this is this gives us a QID that is unique, QID record, with that data. And you know, here we see the low-level categories and the high-level category. Again, these are things that were told how to do it in the parser, the DSM editor, and I'll show you that later. And I did a video a while back, well, on this button, on extract property, and this is how you can actually extract all the things that the original creator of the parser didn't consider, and then you can extract them via regex, JSON, leaf, etc. Right? And in the DSM editor, it's a lot easier because it actually suggests you the regex. You don't have, if you don't know regex, then it's easier to do it there. So to see this in the DSM editor, the easiest way is actually to right-click here and click on View in DSM editor. But I just also want to make sure that you know that wherever you can get a particular log, if you are not seeing it in here, if you grab it, put it in the clipboard, you can actually paste it. I'll show you once I get there. But I'm not. That's the longest path to get there. So we're going to grab that element and we're going to open it into the DSM editor. And sometimes, depending on the speed of your system, you may need to wait for this screen to pop up. So now it came out quickly. It needs to completely populate all these fields in here. And what I meant to say before is that you can click on this pencil and do paste in here, and it will be the same thing as we did with just one click. Now, notice that this event is said that is parse and map, meaning I was able to identify the components of it, and I found a unique event ID and an event category for it, right? So in here are the those additional things that I want to extract from the particular payload. We can actually click on any one of them. Let me click in this one on authentication package. Maybe there is no, that field does not exist in here. If that is the case, by the way, what you'll see is what we saw when we look at the event, that is NA is not available, right? So here's the authentication package. And you'll see that there are multiple combinations of event ID and event category that give us what we see multiple QID records. Okay? But more on that in a second. Now, here is where you do that actual mapping. And here we see combination of event ID and event category, and that identifies a unique particular event. In our case, if you remember, the ID, the event ID for the MS SQL login succeed from login user, something that was 184.53. So if we search for that, we actually find 2, but notice that the event category of ours is the one here on the bottom, this one over here. And notice that these give us access to that QID record. And we can actually edit here and alter it should we need to, but we don't have to. So notice all these things, again, they don't come from the payload, they are part of the actual record itself. So if we go back to the Properties tab, we see that there are many things here that are custom, right? These are actually, I opened this one. Notice that there are things that are really part of the normalized properties. Remember those? Well, they are actually here. And we can actually see them also here from this particular event that we pasted in here, that is parsed and mapped. A few things. This is a normalized property. Anything that has the word custom, obviously, is a custom property, as we can see. And anything that has an asterisk has been extracted from the QID record. So let me see, let me find one in here. Well, of course, the event ID and event category are part of the unique properties in here. This is custom. This one, event name, remember, that's one of the ones that are in the QID record. And there should be more. At least the severity is there. What is this one? That's that's a normalized property. The low-level category. We will need to make this screen bigger to see that that should come with an asterisk. So the field is so large. Let me go all the way to severity. There it is. You see that asterisk denotes that it was extracted from the QID record. So to recap here, on the property tab on the DSM editor, you will specify what are the things that you are trying to access from it. So you put the regular expression. If it's JSON, LIF, or any other format, you don't need regular expression. If it's regular expression, this thing can suggest you your regex, so you don't have to do it if you don't know to. But what you'll do in the first part is you will assign a low level, a high level category, and you capture that element. Then on the event mapping, you need to actually go and on that unique combination of those particular events ID and event category that denotes, that's going to give you a QID record that you need to populate. In fact, we can actually click here and edit, and this is how you can actually, put the data that you want. You can create a new QID if one does not exist, etc. And that enables QReader to know, oh, I know this particular event. I know how to parse the different elements, then those normalized properties and any other custom property, and I know what unique event is mapped, and that's why you see these parse and map. Otherwise, you may see not parse, or you may see parse but not map, meaning I did not find that combination of those two. One final thing is that the property, in order for the property to be, let's go into the admin tab and go to this tab, custom event properties. Here we can see all the events, all those properties in here. The properties need to be enabled. Okay, you can have properties that are disabled, They don't, and they will not work. They need to be enabled and index, and well, that's also on the rules for the rule to fire. But for example, let's actually search for one property here. Authentication package. And these searches are case insensitive. And notice that we find here several, even they're all for this particular Windows log source, right? And notice that they have different event names, because again, there's been a different combinations of event ID extracted from the logs and the event category that was assigned that give us every one of these unique ones.